Hello everybody, I'm Jeremiah, and today we are going to be talking about how I mix and master my music. So I'm a visual learner, so I'm going to be using Adobe Illustrator here to show you kind of the steps that I go through. And I just wanted to start off by saying I'm not a professional, sound engineer. So trust your own ears and see what other resources are out there on YouTube, or contact somebody that would be willing to spend some time with you, maybe somebody that has done a lot more mixing and mastering than myself. And just take everything with a grain of salt, and at the end of the day, use your ears and let your ears be the real judge for what you're doing. Don't be scared to compare what you're doing to other mixes that you enjoy, and just go back and forth like that. So without further ado, let's go ahead and open up a project here. Of course, I'm using Adobe Audition, and although Adobe Audition isn't a very typical audio interface for bluegrass acoustic music, it's what I use because I have the Adobe Creative Cloud. Now, I suggest getting something like Cubase, but all the information that I'm going to be showing you or like telling you here today on Adobe Audition, it's going to transfer to Cubase and other programs. All of them are more or less the same. The interface is the biggest difference. Some of them are more compatible with different plugins and different softwares, which you may like better. That's yet again why a lot of pros like Pro Tools and Cubase. But if you're just getting started, something like Adobe Audition is going to be fine. And yet again, all of the information I'm going to be telling you today is going to be applicable no matter what user interface that you're going to be using. And so to start off, let's go ahead and play. Hopefully you guys are going to be able to hear this audio. This is Don't Give Your Heart to a Rambler, Little Girl. This is a traditional bluegrass song, so let's just start it from the beginning and listen to about 15 seconds of it so you can get an idea of what I'm working with here. These are just raw tracks I just tracked individually, and I'll go over it in a second. Okay, so some of these tracks are a little sloppy, like music-wise, but don't worry about that. We're not going to be going over delving into the music itself too much, but just to look at the tracks. So let's go ahead and take a look here. If you've seen my last video, or the last video here on the channel about recording, you might know a little bit about the tracking process and how we track to live music. And so what you'll see here is that for most instruments, I've got two tracks, what's considered a left and what's considered a right track. For the bass, it's more like top and bottom, but anyway, they're going to be like labeled left and right. So we have a bass here. Let's go ahead and play some of these by themselves. We're going to have a bass track here. So this is the top bass, and then we have a bottom bass. So they're together. I should set this to 0 just for the time being. And then we have guitar next. So this is the right guitar, and then this is the left guitar. You can hear they sound a little different based on mic placement and stuff like that. And then we have a mandolin, left and right mandolin. And then banjo. Lead vocal. And then of course the harmony vocal. Don't fall in love with me, darling. And then violin I did last. And violin is really tough for me to play, so I end up chopping up tracks a lot, to be honest. So you'll see here I like chop this break up into pieces so I could get the sound that I wanted, which probably isn't the best habit to get into, but I struggle playing that the most, so that's something I do. So I just clean those up as I go. Okay, and you'll see too for the violin track, I just did a mono here. You can use two mics and record to a mono. The reason people usually record something like vocals and violin and mono is that you can do some slight pitch correction which might be useful if you're like me on the violin, where you're like not the best and you really need that pitch correction. I mean, even pros use pitch correction on professional recordings. So that's just something to keep in mind, but just never overdo pitch correction in bluegrass music. Never overdo it, because it sounds really fake really fast. So just be careful with that. All right, so let's go ahead and go back to Illustrator here, and let's take a look at, this is what I call the pyramid of completion, and it is organized into what I think is the most important parts here. Tracking, you see, is going to take up the most of your space here. Tracking and recording is the most important. If you are working with bad raw tracks, you're going to get a bad finished product. You cannot fix bad tracks. If the EQs, like if the room you're playing in has a lot of noise, if the EQ is really poor in the room you're playing in, if your mics are super low quality or placed really incorrectly, you can only do so much to make those tracks better. So keep that in mind. This tracking recording part here in orange is the largest, because it should take the majority of your time, and it should be the most important part, because especially with acoustic music, like I said, that's what's really important. We're not going to try to overtune what we're doing too much. The next part here is going to be mixing. Mixing is actually getting the mix that you want as far as stereo sound. Of course, we're not going to be listening to music on mono most of the time, so you should have a good set of headphones. And I have the Rocket 5, I'm sorry, I don't have the Rocket 5. I have the PreSonus equivalent of the Rocket 5. It's a PreSonus monitor setups here too, but the Rocket 5s are great studio monitors, so they're about $100. They're not too expensive, so having a good set of left and right monitors to listen to also is really great. After mixing, you're going to be going to automation. Automation is just adjusting individual levels on individual instruments to make them move in and out. And then lastly, you're going to be mastering. Mastering is going to be adjusting the master levels to make sure that you have enough fullness, and to make sure that you're not having any peaking. Everything is as loud as it should be, so that levels are consistent. Usually it's done like on an album, but on a track, you just want levels to be consistent to that track. And then you're finally going to be exporting your file. So that is the order that we're going to be going in. Of course, I've already done the recording and tracking, and we have an entire video on this here on the channel, so just go watch that. Mixing is what we're going to be doing now. So first of all, let's go ahead and talk about the bass tracks. Bass tracks, you typically want to leave dead center. For everything I'm saying here, this is what I do, and this is what, when I listen to CDs and stuff, I try to figure out what they're doing. Almost always the bass is dead center. So for the bass tracks here, what I'm going to be doing is we're going to add some effects to it, and these are the effects that I typically use for a bass track. First of all, you're going to be wanting to get something like some type of compressor. I really like a tube model compressor that comes with Adobe Audition, but a compressor is going to lift up the really quiet parts, and it's going to compress the really high parts, so it basically levels everything out. This output gain is how much it's going to bring up the low parts. And usually the output gain I usually keep it pretty low, maybe 3 or 4, and then the threshold is how much it's going to be cutting off of the tops. So that's how much it's compressing it down. And your threshold, usually you want it to be the negative version of whatever your output is, or a little bit higher. And we're going to play this track here in a moment, and so we can hear it. Ratio, I usually leave 8:1. That's a pretty healthy ratio. You don't want to go really above that, and you don't want to go below 2. You don't want to go below like 3 or 2. Attack, and that's like how much delay there is on the sharpness of notes and stuff. And then that's similar to release, is like how long it takes for it to adjust to a note peaking. So none of that's really important. I usually leave attack around 10.5 is fine. Like, these two aren't really important. You're not going to notice them a whole lot on your average track that you're recording at home. If you're working with like studio quality sound, you might be able to mess with these and get a very precise sound. But otherwise, just leave them as they are most of the time. And yeah, so let's go ahead and play this track. And what you'll see is, as I raise the output, this bar over here on the left is going to go up as the output goes up. And then if I change the threshold, you're going to start seeing it hitting red here. So what this red right here is doing is showing that it is cutting, it's clipping this amount right here. So the more I do this, you can hear it's compressing it more and more. So we're just going to go ahead and set the output to 7, and we're just going to set the threshold to -10. That way, if I hit a bass note really hard and it goes above this, you know, this -10 mark right here, it'll clip it, and that gives us a good, nice volume on the bass. All right, I hope that made sense. That's how you are going to compress a bass track. And when you're compressing, you're going to compress most of your tracks. What it does, yet again, is it takes the lows, the like quiet notes, and it brings the quiet ones up, and it takes the loud ones and brings them down. So yet again, it compresses everything, and that makes everything sound more full as well. So for EQ, bass is really simple. I usually drop this high. These are going to be like the super high notes, the bell type of notes, the high pitch ringing. I usually just drop that, because every time you subtract something, you're giving more strength to another part, if that makes sense. So if I subtract, you know, the very bottom and very top, then these mids get higher. If I subtract the mids, the highs and the lows get higher. So I usually do this little formation right here. I bring 1K up a little bit, I bring 4K up a little bit, and I bring the 2K up a little bit less than those. So we'll do like 6, 6, and 3. Okay, and so we get this little like smiley face thing happening right here. These notes right here are going to be most of your string noise and the what we're going to call attack on the bass. That's that punchiness to the bass. It comes from these right here. Most of the bass notes are actually closer to 125 to 50, but that's that punchiness that we're looking for right there. So we're going to do that, and we've listened now. The bass is really punchy and has a lot of string noise, which is good. So we're going to go ahead and do the same thing to this track. More or less the same thing. Let's go ahead and adjust our EQ here. There's no real exact way to do this either. I kind of do it a little different every time and try to get the sound Alright, so now we got a bass thumping. There of course is background noise in this. I just recorded it with the AC running and everything, but for the time being that's fine. So that's all I do with bass. We're just going to leave that as it is. Let's go ahead and go to the guitar track now. The guitar track, I usually do the same type of thing. Let's go ahead and throw a guitar on here. And let's listen to, let's see. Okay, so tube model compressor, same thing here. Same thing as bass. And then you're going to try to get something like a parametric equalizer. You can use a like one of the standard 10 bar or 30 bar equalizers if you'd like. I like the parametric equalizer because it has a lot of presets, and then you can specifically change things here. What you want to do is do a high pass, so you just drop all these bass notes. These are going to be like really beefy bass and mids that the guitar will overproduce. An acoustic guitar especially will overproduce these. So you're going to cut these, and then I usually raise the highs just a little bit. And yet again, these highs here are like string noise in the bottom two strings. That adds a really nice kind of crispiness to it that I really like about the acoustic guitar. Okay, and then this is the right guitar, so I'm going to go ahead and put this all right. So hopefully you guys can hear the stereo sound, but if you look down here, you'll see this one is all right. And then we're going to do this one all left. And we're going to apply the same guitar effect here. I use the same thing on guitar and mandolin. And let's go ahead and listen to this. Now if you look down here, you'll see that the guitar right is a little bit louder than the guitar left, so that's a pretty easy fix. You want them to be very similar. And yet again, just trust your ears on this too. Like I like how it sounds right there. So let's listen to these two together. Alright, sounds great already. And so let's go ahead and move on to the mandolin track. Mandolin track, same as guitar. You'll see I have a preset for these. Tube model compressor, just kind of leaving it around this bass, like -8.5, 8 ratio here. Yet again, the tube model compressor for auditions has a lot of setups. I've tried a ton of these. I'm not a huge fan of many of them. I end up doing it custom usually most of the time, so we'll apply that there. Okay, let's go ahead and do the same thing here. And then the mandolin, every bluegrass album is going to have it differently, but typically mandolin is set more towards the left. Some people do 100% left, 100% left. I do not recommend doing that. Some Del McCoury albums have done that in the past. You can do 100% 100% 0, so L100 0. You can do full pan if you want, so L100 R100. This is where you as an individual can choose what you really want it to sound like. What I like to do is L100 R50. The reason why is that it still makes the dominant sound for the mandolin come out of the left, which is what I want. But it also gives this nice kind of middle ground to it, so it allows it to sneak into the right ear so that it's not hard left and hard right. So let's go ahead and listen to this. So you can see down here, you'll be able to kind of adjust it and get the mixture that you like. So for this song, I think I'm going to do it around 30. So we'll do L100 R30, something like that, okay? Next up is banjo. Banjo is a little bit different, and it's going to really depend on the mics you're using and the space you're using. So let's go ahead and see. My banjo preset, EQ, I usually only drop the bottom and top. That's it. You should not have to EQ a banjo very much if you're recording correctly. If you are recording in a setup that's not ideal, you might have too many mids, too many highs. You can kind of adjust that, but usually banjo, you don't really want to touch it. Tube model compressor, same deal here. Want to not have to touch it too much here. Let's go ahead and kind of adjust these where I want it. And then banjo, we're going to do the opposite of the mandolin. So the banjo is going to be, oops. Okay, yeah, banjo is going to be the opposite of the mandolin. So L30 and then R100. So just completely reverses. So that way we have the mandolin in left, banjo on right. That's pretty industry standard when it comes to bluegrass stuff here. Okay, so let's go ahead and apply the banjo effect to this one as well. All right, let's go ahead and listen to it real quick, just the banjo by itself. And then I'm going to bring up the right and take down the left just a little bit. Yeah, that's good. All right, and then we'll move on to vocals. Vocals, pretty easy. For vocals, I usually use a little bit of automated pitch correction. And when I say a little bit, I'm using like a chromatic, and then I'm going to turn the sensitivity down to like 25. And that way it'll just catch really off notes. And in a traditional bluegrass song like this, I might honestly just turn it off altogether. But we'll see. And then for EQ, I just drop lows and highs. This makes the mid sound really full. This makes the vocal sound really full. And then tube compressor, same thing here again, just kind of keeping the same that I was doing before. Let's go ahead and just listen to the lead vocal. Don't fall in love with me, darling, I'm a rambler. Although you're the sweetest sweetheart in this world. And then we can do the same thing for the tenor vocal here. Bring that sensitivity down a little bit. EQ is fine, tube model compressor, okay? And then let's unmute that and listen here. Don't fall in love with me, darling, I'm a rambler. Although you're the sweetest sweetheart in this world. Well, it's all for your sake, dear, that I'm leaving. Okay, so that's how you do that. And then the last thing we have is the violin, which is honestly very similar to the vocals here. We're just gonna pop the harmony vocal track on it. A little bit of autocorrect. I usually do a little bit more just because I'm not a great violin player. EQ, I usually do almost nothing. If anything, I drop lows. I do like the high pass like I do on the mandolin, and then that is all the same there. So all the same on the compressor. Okay, let's go ahead and listen to it. Now we're almost done with the mixing part of this. where we adjusted the stereo sounds. Let's go ahead and listen.
Don't fall in love with me, darling, I'm a rambler. Oh.
I tried to turn it up there so you guys could hear that a little bit better. Okay, so now we're going to start getting on to automation. Automation is where you're going to go through and clean up tracks and see what levels need to come in and what needs to come out. So you always want to base it around your guitar. And we're going to be starting to use something called bus tracks here, which are going to be pretty helpful. So for me, it's Alt B. We're going to go ahead and add, I usually do 4 bus tracks, okay? And then I label these as well. We're going to have guitar bus track. We're going to have a bass bus track. I'll explain in a moment what bus tracks are. Vocals, and then one I just call core usually. Bus tracks allow you to combine tracks and edit them as a unit. So like if I'm applying reverb to vocals, I can apply it to all vocals that fall under that parent. If you do website coding, it's the same type of thing as a parent page. If you edit something on the master page, it goes to all the other pages. Same type of thing here. And then we're going to go through here. This is the bass, so we're going to choose bus, bass, like so. Bus guitar. Now this is something that you don't have to do, but I personally think it helps a lot getting a better sound, because you can edit things a lot easier. So mandolin, banjo, violin are going to go in core. Guitar gets its own, bass gets its own, and then all the vocals get their own. So it's going to get core as well. Okay. For the effects here, for the automation on guitar, we're gonna want to put a hard limiter on it. This is going to keep it from peaking. So I usually just use a default hard limiter. What this does, it won't allow it to go over this decibel point. So it just kind of makes everything a little bit quieter on the guitar so that it doesn't peak, because we don't want anything to peak here. And then I usually do a reverb. Now, a lot of people do really fancy stuff on reverbs. You can get a ton of really cool effects, and you can even buy some really great reverbs and stuff. I usually do something like a studio reverb, which I think is an Audition exclusive type of thing. It just emulates what the sound of a studio reverb would be environment. I usually turn a decay down, and then I usually try to balance. Something like this. A dry sound is that crispness, and the wet sound is like the raw reverb bounciness sound. So I try to get a good mix of dry and wet sound. So something like that usually is fine. Okay, so now all the guitar tracks have reverb. Bass, I don't do anything. That's just to adjust levels. Vocals, we're going to also do a hard limiter. And we're going to also do a studio reverb effect on that. So let's go ahead and do that. Studio reverb. I usually turn the room size down. I usually turn decay down. And oops, sorry about that. And then we're going to turn that. Okay. So let's go ahead and listen to the vocal.
Well, I handed you a line, now I'm sorry. You're just a little sweeter than the rest. Believe me when I say I don't want to hurt you.
I usually make the vocals have a little bit of a wet reverb compared to the instruments. I like to have a dry reverb. But yet again, that's just me. So experiment around, trust your ears. And then core, we're going to do just a reverb. So let's just do a studio reverb. You can also throw a hard limiter on this if your like banjo or something is peaking, but not really necessary, I don't think. Okay, so we're just gonna do something like that. So I'm kind of just using default default settings on these reverbs here. I'm not trying to do anything too fancy. Now comes more of the automation part. We're going to start adjusting levels. So let's listen to the guitar. We've already tried to balance the left and right on the guitar. So I'm just listening. It sounds pretty balanced. So let's go ahead and just turn the guitar up a little bit. And then let's throw in the bass. I like the bass really forward in the mix, so I really like to be able to hear the bass. I want it to be loud. Alright, that sounds good. Let's go ahead and add the mandolin. This is where we're going to adjust levels and stuff like that. I feel like the mandolin needs to be a little bit louder, so. Okay, a good way to test it is let's listen to the start here. I'm cutting this so we can adjust the volume a little easier on this. Because I want this to come forward. So this is where the automation comes in. What we're going to do is, like, I want this to be louder, so we're just going to raise this 4 decibels. Each one 4 decibels here. Something like that. So let's listen to it now. We'll see. So now it's a little bit more forward in our ears. That's what I want. Alright, that's good. So now, like, this break is, you know, forward enough, like, is as if you were on stage and you were stepping towards the mic. That's what I want. And so now I'll go through and I'll say, like, oh, I want this G run to be louder. So there's a little C run right here. Let's say I wanted the C run to be louder. You can just do something like this. So now that little note section right there will come forward a little bit more, right? So that's how that works. This is the automating part. Yeah, and so you can spend a lot of time automating stuff like this and getting it to sound precisely how you want it. Like, here's some backup mandolin stuff in the second verse. So I want this to come forward. And I want it to go down here. Okay, let's go ahead and introduce. I try to get that these 3 instruments done first because this is your timing core, and then I bring in the banjo. So let's go ahead and, or I'll do the vocals. Let's go ahead and do the vocals next. Okay, let's see.
Don't fall in love with me, darling, I'm a rambler. Although you're the sweetest sweetheart in this world, it's all for your sake, dear, that I'm leaving.
I want tenor to go back just a little bit.
Don't give your heart to rambler, little girl.
And I have a few phrasing. I have a few phrasing issues. Like the tenor isn't matching the lead, but we can fix that as well. I can go in and slice stuff around and line it up.
Don't fall in love with me, darling, I'm a rambler.
That one's a lot better.
Although you're the sweetest sweetheart in this world, it's all for your sake, dear, that I'm leaving. So don't give your heart to rambler, little girl.
Alright, that sounds good to me. And then let's go ahead and do the banjo now. The banjo, I feel like, is the toughest for me.
Don't fall in love with me, darling, I'm a rambler. Although
Now, this is where I would probably spend, you know, an hour really fine-tuning the automation. I would say, oh, I want this specific banjo run to come in a little, you know, to come up a little bit. Or I want this break to go back, or you know, that's just an example. So for example, there's a banjo break. Right here. So I want this to come forward. So that sounded good. The banjo is naturally a little bit louder, so you don't need it to come forward quite as much. And then last but not least, I'm not going to spend quite as much time on this right now. We'll do a cut and then I'll come back. Let's go ahead and do a little bit of the violin. Just a little loud.
Well, I handed you my way. I don't want to hurt you or do anything. Love with me, darling, I'm rambling. Although you're the sweetest sweetheart in this world, it's all for your sake, dear, that I'm leaving.
I feel like vocals need to come forward just a tad.
If I ever get the blues, my little darling, with a roar
I want this chop to come up a little.
I long to hear the whistle of the freight train and the boxcars as they rattle.
So one thing, I'm not really happy with the EQ on this violin quite yet. I feel like there's not enough mids, so I might go in and kind of buff the mids a little bit, right? So I'm going to spend about 15 minutes and kind of fine tune this, and then we'll come back and we'll go over mastering. Okay, I'm back, and we're going to spend a few minutes here just cleaning up some of the tracks. Now, I advise everyone to, instead of trying to add something like a noise removal, try to have your environment be really friendly for recording with. It's something that I struggle with because I'm just recording usually in my living room. So if you have to use a noise reduction, keep it very, very low. Do not use very much of it. In fact, I'm going to use one on here, but I'm going to turn the noise reduction down to 2 decibels. I'm going to turn noisiness at 10%. So it still is going to have some noise. It's not going to just completely eradicate the white noise, but it is going to kind of tune it out. And then also I kind of know where my white noise lies. There's a fan in my PC that picks it up most of the time, so I kind of know where it's around this 4 decibels, and it's going to be able to pick it up. And so let's play it here for a second. You'll be able to hear. The last 2 things that you really want on this is the hard limiter, same thing that we're adding to the other tracks, so I'm not going to go over that. And then the Adobe Audition has this mastering option. I turn peaking off, and then reverb, we added reverb elsewhere, not important. Exciter, it's this type of false way to add some sharpness to your tracks. That's what preamps usually do, so you don't really want to add that. Widener, yet again, we already mixed everything, so that's not important either. And then Loudness Maximizer, I usually don't touch. If I do use it, I use it very sparingly, like around 10%. It'll bring up some of the low, kind of the quieter stuff up, and so that it sounds more full. You usually want to do this in the mix naturally. You usually don't want to add any Loudness Maximizer. if you do, like I said, you want to use just a very, very little bit, and especially if you're doing dynamic music where it's not just banjo rolling and this full sound. You don't want to use this at all. You want to let the dynamics work and speak for themselves. And then output gain, I usually just turn it down a little bit to make sure that we're not getting any peaking, because we're going to go ahead and play this now, but we want to make sure that the audio is sitting right here in between -9 and -3. So let's go ahead and play a bit. So you'll see. So this one's hovering right there, and I spent a little bit more time. I took a break there. I spent a little bit more time just making sure I liked where the levels are and stuff like that. I actually want the vocals to go down just slightly. Something like that should be fine. And I think we're good to go. So what I'm going to do is, so you see this? This means that something in the core was peaking. Easy way to fix that. We're just going to add a hard limiter on here, or you could just go in and automate that specific part that is also peaking. You could do that. We're just going to add a hard limiter here. That'll prevent that from peaking. Alright, so I think we're good. That is the track that's peaking. We're going to turn that down a little bit as well. Just a little bit. Make sure that we're not getting that peaking. You usually want to find out where that is. So it's usually on a loud part, so maybe on a chop here.
Don't fall in love with me, darling.
Nope. So we're good there now. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. I'm going to let this play in the background. The final audio, and I hope that this video was helpful for you guys, so enjoy. Thanks for watching, guys.
Don't fall in love with me, darling, I'm a rambler. Although you're the sweetest sweetheart in this world, it's all for your sake, dear, that I'm leaving. So don't give your heart to a rambler, little girl. Well, I handed you a lie, now I'm sorry. You're just a little sweeter than the rest. Believe me when I say I don't want to hurt you or do anything to mar your happiness. And don't fall in love with me, darling, I'm a rambler. Although you're the sweetest sweetheart in this world, it's all for your sake, dear, that I'm leaving. So don't give your heart to a rambler, little girl. If I ever get the blues, my little darling, or the lure of the road on my mind, I long to hear the whistle of the freight train and the boxcars as they rattle down the line. But don't fall in love with me, darling, I'm a rambler. Although you're the sweetest sweetheart in this world, it's all for your sake, dear, that I'm leaving. So don't give your heart to a rambler, little girl. Don't fall in love with me, darling, I'm a rambler. Although you're the sweetest sweetheart in this world, it's all for your sake, dear, that I'm leaving. So don't give your heart to a rambler, little girl. Yeah, I said don't give your heart to a rambler, little girl.